Syria, March 1949, Damascus. The CIA orchestrated its first successful coup in the Middle East, overthrowing Syria's democratically elected president, Shukri al-Quwatli, and installing Colonel Husni al-Zaim. The operation was conducted to secure American oil pipeline interests and block Soviet influence in the region. It set a pattern that would repeat for decades. Regime change justified by geopolitical strategy, executed through covert operations with little regard for long-term consequences. The 1949 coup was just the beginning. Throughout the Cold War, the CIA attempted multiple operations to control Syrian leadership. In 1956 and 1957, further coup attempts failed. The goal remained consistent: install a government favorable to American interests and hostile to Soviet expansion. Syria responded by aligning closer to the Soviet Union and eventually forming the United Arab Republic with Egypt in 1958. American intervention had achieved the opposite of its stated objective. Modern intervention began in 2014 when the United States launched airstrikes against ISIS targets in Syria without Syrian government permission. Operation Inherent Resolve conducted thousands of bombing missions across Syrian territory. American special forces operated on the ground, supporting Kurdish militias against ISIS. The campaign continued for years, with the U.S. military establishing permanent bases in eastern Syria. More recently, in 2025 and 2026, American forces conducted precision strikes on Iranian-linked facilities inside Syria, targeting weapons depots and militia positions. These strikes occurred without congressional authorization or UN approval, justified as defensive measures against Iranian proxies. Over 70 decades, the United States has bombed, invaded, or attempted to overthrow the Syrian government repeatedly. Thousands of airstrikes have been conducted. Civilian casualties number in the thousands. American troops remain stationed in Syria today, occupying oil fields in the northeast. The intervention that began in 1949 with a single coup has evolved into permanent military presence with no clear end date. Iran, August 19, 1953, Tehran. The CIA executed Operation Ajax, overthrowing Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. The coup was ordered after Mossadegh nationalized Iran's oil industry, which had been controlled by the British-owned Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. American and British intelligence agents organized protests, bribed military officers, and spread propaganda. Within days, Mossadegh was arrested and imprisoned. The CIA reinstalled Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi as absolute monarch, giving him dictatorial powers. The Shah would rule as an American-backed autocrat for the next 26 years. The 1953 coup created lasting consequences. On November 4, 1979, Iranian revolutionaries stormed the American embassy in Tehran, taking 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. The Iranian Revolution had overthrown the Shah earlier that year, replacing him with an Islamic republic under Ayatollah Khomeini. Iranians hadn't forgotten that America had destroyed their democracy and installed a dictator. The hostage crisis ended American-Iranian relations. Decades of sanctions, covert operations, and proxy conflicts followed. The United States supported Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War of 1980 to 1988, providing intelligence and weapons that helped Saddam Hussein kill hundreds of thousands of Iranians. Direct military conflict came in 1987 and 1988 during the Tanker War. Iranian forces had been attacking oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. On April 14, 1988, the USS Samuel B. Roberts struck an Iranian mine, injuring 10 sailors. The American response was Operation Praying Mantis, the largest naval battle since the war ended. U.S. forces destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms, sank the Iranian frigate Sahand, and damaged or destroyed multiple Iranian gunboats. Iran's navy suffered catastrophic losses in a single day. 2 months later, on July 3, 1988, the USS Vincennes shot down Iran Air Flight 655, killing all 290 civilians aboard, including 66 children. The U.S. claimed it was an accident.
Recent escalation has been dramatic. On January 3, 2020, a U.S. drone strike at Baghdad airport assassinated Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, one of Iran's most powerful military leaders. Iran retaliated with ballistic missile strikes on American bases in Iraq. In June 2025, the United States conducted precision airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities at Fordo and Natanz, claiming Iran was approaching weapons-grade uranium enrichment. The strikes destroyed centrifuge facilities and set back Iran's nuclear program by years. 7 decades after the 1953 coup, the conflict continues with no resolution in sight. Iraq, January 17, 1991, Baghdad. At 2:38 a.m. local time, American F-117 stealth fighters dropped the first bombs on Baghdad, beginning Operation Desert Storm. Iraq has been the most frequently bombed country in the Middle East since 1980. What followed was 43 consecutive days of aerial bombardment, one of the most intensive bombing campaigns in military history. Over 100,000 sorties dropped 88,500 tons of bombs on Iraq and occupied Kuwait. The stated objective was liberating Kuwait after Saddam Hussein's invasion on August 2, 1990. The Gulf War was devastatingly one-sided. A U.S.-led coalition of 35 nations assembled over 500,000 troops in Saudi Arabia. The air campaign systematically destroyed Iraq's military infrastructure, communications networks, and government facilities. On February 24, 1991, the ground invasion began. It lasted exactly 100 hours. Iraqi forces, already shattered by weeks of bombing, collapsed immediately. On the highway of death, American aircraft trapped and destroyed retreating Iraqi military columns, killing thousands of soldiers who were withdrawing from Kuwait. The war ended on February 28, 1991. Iraq had suffered an estimated 25,000 to 50,000 military deaths. Coalition forces lost 292 soldiers. But the bombing didn't stop. From 1991 to 2003, the United States enforced no-fly zones over northern and southern Iraq, conducting continuous patrols and striking Iraqi air defense sites whenever they activated radar. In December 1998, Operation Desert Fox launched 4 days of intensive bombing, firing over 400 cruise missiles at suspected weapons facilities. UN sanctions imposed after the Gulf War killed an estimated 500,000 Iraqi children through malnutrition and lack of medical supplies, according to UN estimates. When asked if the deaths were worth it, U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright replied, "We think the price is worth it." The 2003 invasion was based on false claims. On March 20, 2003, the United States launched Operation Iraqi Freedom with shock and awe, massive aerial bombardment of Baghdad designed to terrorize the Iraqi government to surrender. President George W. Bush claimed Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction and had connections to al-Qaeda. Both claims were later proven completely false. American forces captured Baghdad on April 9, 2003. Saddam Hussein was found hiding in December 2003, later tried and executed. No WMDs were ever found. The occupation lasted 8 years. Sectarian violence exploded. Al-Qaeda hadn't been in Iraq before the invasion. The American occupation created the conditions for its entry. By 2006, Iraq was in civil war. American forces withdrew in December 2011, leaving over 4,500 U.S. troops dead and an estimated 200,000 to 500,000 Iraqi civilians killed. American bombing resumed in 2014 when ISIS captured large portions of Iraq. From 2014 to 2017, the U.S. conducted thousands more airstrikes, dropping over 100,000 bombs on Iraq and Syria combined. Even after ISIS's defeat, strikes continue against Iranian-backed militias. In January 2020, the U.S. bombed targets at al-Assad Air Base. American forces remain in Iraq today. Iraq has been under continuous American military action for over 30 years. Afghanistan, August 20, 1998. 75 Tomahawk cruise missiles struck al-Qaeda training camps near Khost and Jalalabad in eastern Afghanistan.
President Bill Clinton ordered the strikes in retaliation for al-Qaeda's bombing of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania 2 weeks earlier, which killed 224 people. The missiles destroyed several camps but missed their primary target, Osama bin Laden, who had left hours before the attack. The strikes marked the first direct American military action in Afghanistan. They would not be the last. The full-scale invasion came after September 11, 2001. 19 hijackers, mostly Saudi nationals trained by al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, killed nearly 3,000 Americans in coordinated attacks on New York and Washington. The Taliban government in Afghanistan refused to surrender bin Laden without evidence of his involvement. On October 7, 2001, Operation Enduring Freedom began. American and British forces launched airstrikes across Afghanistan, while CIA operatives and special forces worked with Northern Alliance militias on the ground. The Taliban government collapsed within 2 months. Kabul fell on November 13, 2001. By December, the Taliban had been driven from power and al-Qaeda scattered, but bin Laden escaped into Pakistan. What was supposed to be a quick operation became America's longest war. U.S. forces remained in Afghanistan for 20 years, conducting continuous combat operations against a resurgent Taliban insurgency. Troop levels fluctuated. President Obama ordered a surge to 100,000 troops in 2010, then began withdrawals. President Trump reduced forces to 2,500 by early 2021. The air campaign never stopped. Between 2004 and 2019, the U.S. dropped over 38,000 bombs on Afghanistan. In 2019 alone, American aircraft dropped 7,423 bombs, the highest annual total of the entire war. Drone strikes killed Taliban fighters, al-Qaeda operatives, and thousands of civilians caught in the targeting. The withdrawal was chaotic and humiliating. President Biden announced complete withdrawal by September 11, 2021. The Taliban immediately launched offensives across the country. On August 15, 2021, the Taliban fighters entered Kabul without resistance. The Afghan government collapsed. Desperate Afghans mobbed Kabul airport, trying to escape. Some clung to departing aircraft and fell to their deaths. On August 26th, an ISIS suicide bomber killed 13 U.S. service members and over 170 Afghans at the airport gate. The last American troops left on August 30th, 2021. The Taliban controlled Afghanistan again, exactly as they had in 2001. The war cost over 2,400 American troops killed, more than 20,000 wounded, and an estimated $2 trillion spent. Afghan casualties are harder to count. At least 66,000 Afghan military and police killed, and between 46,000 and 170,000 civilians dead. The longest war in American history ended in complete failure. Libya, April 15, 1986, Tripoli. At 2 a.m., American F-111 bombers struck the Libyan capital in Operation El Dorado Canyon. President Ronald Reagan ordered the attack in retaliation for the bombing of a West Berlin discotheque 10 days earlier that killed 2 U.S. soldiers. Over 100 aircraft launched from British bases and aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean. The targets included military installations and Muammar Gaddafi's residential compound. Gaddafi survived, but his 15-month-old adopted daughter Hana was killed in the strike. The bombing killed an estimated 60 Libyan civilians and 15 military personnel. The operation was controversial. France and Spain refused to allow American bombers to use their airspace, forcing pilots to take a longer route around the Iberian Peninsula. Some European allies condemned the strike as disproportionate. Arab nations accused the U.S. of terrorism. But Reagan declared it a success, warning other nations against supporting terrorism. Gaddafi remained in power, increasingly isolated but defiant.
25 years later, Libya became a target again. In February 2011, Protests erupted across Libya as part of the Arab Spring uprising sweeping the Middle East. Gaddafi's forces responded with brutal crackdowns. On March 17, 2011, the UN Security Council authorized a no-fly zone to protect civilians. 2 days later, Operation Odyssey Dawn began. American, British, and French aircraft launched over 110 Tomahawk cruise missiles at Libyan air defenses. What was authorized as civilian protection quickly became a regime change operation. NATO aircraft conducted over 26,000 sorties over 7 months, including 9,700 strike missions. They systematically destroyed Gaddafi's military and targeted his command structure directly. On October 20, 2011, Gaddafi was captured by rebel forces in his hometown of Sirte. Video footage showed him being beaten, sodomized with a bayonet, and shot to death. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, when told of his death, laughed and said, "We came, we saw, he died." Libya collapsed into civil war immediately. Competing militias fought for control. ISIS established a stronghold in Sirte by 2015. The U.S. conducted additional airstrikes against ISIS targets from 2015 to 2016. Libya remains a failed state, with 2 rival governments, ongoing violence, open slave markets, and a refugee crisis that destabilized Europe. The intervention that was supposed to protect civilians created chaos that continues today.
5 countries, 7 decades, one pattern repeating. Syria, 1949, a CIA coup to control oil pipelines. Iran, 1953, democracy overthrown for corporate interests. Iraq, 1991, 3 decades of continuous bombing. Afghanistan, 2001, 20 years ending in failure. Libya, 2011, regime change creating a failed state. Each intervention was justified differently: fighting communism, stopping terrorism, preventing weapons proliferation, protecting civilians. The outcomes tell a different story. Every invasion created the instability used to justify the next intervention. Destroying Iraq's government created ISIS. Overthrowing Libya's regime produced a refugee crisis and slave markets. Occupying Afghanistan for 2 decades ended with the Taliban back in power. The cycle continues: intervention, chaos, more intervention. The cost is measured in millions of lives lost, entire nations destabilized, trillions of dollars spent, and American credibility destroyed. The Middle East has been a proving ground for American military power for 75 years. The wars continue with no end in sight. If you found this video informative, subscribe for more content. Share your thoughts in the comments below.